Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. Today on the show, I am turning the tables. I was interviewed, it must have been 2.5 years ago, for a documentary all about the afterlife. It's called Afterlife, a captivating exploration of life's ultimate mystery. And again, this is an example, I think, of just how people have found my platform and reached out to me. And of course, I was like, I'm so curious. I would love to do this. And so I was interviewed. And Ben Harl is on the show today to talk about the process of making this documentary, about why he wanted to make this documentary about the afterlife based on his own curiosity. And I think you'll find it a really interesting conversation in terms of what he discovered through his journey and what you too can do. It's actually quite simple. What you can do to begin to become your own scientist and explore these various ways of thinking about what happens to us when we die yourself. So with that, here is this week's episode of Life, Death, and the Space Between with Ben Harl. And before I forget, you can get the movie. You can see it. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. So make sure you check out the movie Afterlife, a captivating exploration of life's ultimate mystery. Welcome, Ben, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be able to catch up with you after, it's been at least a year, I think, since the last time we spoke.
Yeah, and we're going to turn the tables here. So you interviewed me for your incredible documentary, Afterlife, a captivating exploration of life's ultimate mystery, for this movie that you produced. And I'm curious now, I know when you originally pitched me, we talked a little bit about it, but I would love to go more in depth and hear from you. What was the impetus for wanting to produce a documentary just all on your own? And then I'm so curious who you talked to and what you learned along the way.
Sure, yeah. So I guess I've always had, I don't know if it's healthy or unhealthy, but I've always had a little bit of a fear and a fascination with what happens to us after we die my whole life. I was raised Catholic, but it didn't stick really with me too much. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it was the organized religious aspect of it that didn't stick, but for some reason, I just had a lot of questions. I went to Catholic school. I had a lot of questions that I wasn't really very satisfied with the answers. I have a lot of respect for the Catholic religion and organized religion in particular, or all organized religions. But for some reason, I just wasn't able to get all of the answers that I was looking for there. So I kind of started this personal journey really early on in life. I'd say in my teens, researching, trying to find as much information as I could. But I did it kind of from an analytical perspective and not a personal one. Just trying to find what's going on after we die. But as I got older, I'm 50 now, and as I get older and my mortality started creeping in on me, some of the personal reasons for wanting to know what happens to us after we die started creeping in along with that. Mm-hmm. So I decided that I wanted to go more in depth, not just looking at analytical aspects of the afterlife, but more spiritual, go on a little bit more of a spiritual journey. And as a filmmaker, I thought, well, if I'm going to go through this process, why not document this process, this personal journey, just in case there's other people who may have similar questions that want answered. So that's kind of where it was born.
So take me through the process and tell me the different people that you spoke to along this journey of yours. And and how each person kind of led you to someone else. Like, what I'm curious about that, because I know some of the behind the scenes, so I can ask those questions.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. When I first started out, I wasn't sure. I mean, of course, I had a list of the types of people that I wanted to talk to, religious folks, people in the paranormal field, even atheists. I spoke to atheists. So I tried to get this general, as broad of a spectrum as I could to see if I could rephrase it. I tried to get as broad spectrum of people as I could to interview for the documentary. And what I found is as I went through, I'd talk to one person and then they would say, oh, you know who you should really talk to? You should talk to this person because I've had conversations with this person and they've been really fantastic. So, for example, I spoke with a paranormal investigator and he said, hey, listen, I have this friend of mine. He is a staunch atheist. I definitely think you should speak to him. He has this really particular insight into what happens to us after we die because he's also a paranormal investigator, but he does it from the perspective of trying to debunk spirits and ghosts and things like that. And then I also ran into that talking to people that are more related to your field, so psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, people kind of in the healing arts, so to speak. So, for example, I spoke to you and you said, hey, I know some people that you may want to talk to that I share similar interests in. So a few of the people that ended up in the documentary are people that you introduced me to. And thank you for that, by the way.
Of course.
They offered extremely valuable insight. And I have to say the thing that I think, and I may be jumping the gun here, you may ask this question, I don't know, but I think the thing that I found the most interesting is out of everybody that I spoke to, I was just really amazed at how similar the stories were. And I was really amazed at how similar the beliefs were. There may be a little bit of a different path on how people get to their beliefs, but it really surprised me at how much similarity there was. And that kind of lends itself to the belief in the afterlife when it all comes down to it. Because even folks that have atheistic viewpoints have had things happen to them in their lives. Well, the ones I've talked to at least have had things happen to them in their lives that defy a conventional explanation. And so people who are on the spiritual side, people who are on the organized religious side, people who come from a medical background, people who come from a psychological background, a lot of these people, they all, when you boil it down, they all have very similar beliefs.
And so when you were speaking to like the paranormal investigator and the atheist investigator, who are both on opposite sides looking at the same research, so to say, how did they come at it and where did they land? I'm particularly curious, like how we kind of do we create a story that we want to tell? Or how are they stepping back and saying like, yes, here is the actual evidence to my experience and here's how I make sense of that?
Yeah. So the paranormal investigator that I interviewed for the film is a Christian. They're a believer in. I don't know. I can't remember if they actually practice organized faith, but they are definitely religious in nature. And so all of their practices, I hate speaking for them, but I think I'm okay. All of their practices with paranormal investigation are kind of, or at least appeared to me like they were a confirmation of what they believed. Whereas with the atheist paranormal investigator, they were on the constant journey. So when they saw things that they couldn't explain, to them, it was more of a declaration of, we don't know what the answer to this is yet. But that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to find a more scientific and analytical answer to these things that I'm seeing that are at this point unexplainable.
But did they ever get to that answer, or it's still okay?
No, it's still open.
Okay. So the I'm just picking this situation apart because I'm just curious. So the person who did have the experience and was sort of looking for, I'm forgetting, there's a psychological term for it that of course is slipping my mind right now. But when they did see the evidence that confounded their belief, it seemed more in the realm of like, oh, of course, that's what's happening here. So it's less objective, right? It's less objective perhaps than the one who's going in saying, I don't think this is possible, and suddenly having experiences that can't be explained, but then continuing to perhaps minimize the extraordinary experience of it all.
Yeah, and both of these individuals, it seemed like they were on opposite ends of that spectrum. Um, and I think they both had very valid reasons for their beliefs, and definitely ones that could make sense when explained. I mean, like I said, when they talked in the movie, both of them had really reasonable responses to believing in what they believe. I would say neither of them sounded like they were unreasonable in why they believed what they believed. It was all based on their life experiences. And just, I think the only difference between the two of them was the way that they interpreted their life experiences. Just one happened to be a little bit more skeptical than the other one. But both seemed pretty valid, which I know is a contradiction. When you're looking for answers like this, you want a solid, concrete answer, and both of them could be wrong and both of them could be right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting field, as you and I both know, because we talk, you did this for your movie, and this is what I do for my podcast, is talk to a variety of people. I think many of the people I talk to tend to have more of the bent of like, yes, there has to be more, because they're comfortable with the fact that we might not understand or know it in our cognitive mind, but there's something out there that just, it doesn't make sense that this is it. The non-material perspective on death. Whereas the materialist perspective tends to be much more concrete around there's no way this is possible and there's no way this is possible, regardless of these things that have happened. It's just not possible that there's more.
Yeah. And I think really, to be honest with you, there's not as much separation between those two types of personalities as we may think. They're actually, from what I found during my research, they're a lot closer than we think. It's just a matter of definition. So, 5,000 years ago, the sun rising and setting was a religious experience for people. Today, we understand it from a scientific perspective. Doesn't make it any less miraculous. It's still a miraculous thing that we can exist on this planet in this certain circumstance, and it may still be created by something that is divine or has intelligence.
And I think too, it's interesting that you choose that, because we were talking earlier, today is my first day back from my summer sabbatical, and I spent a lot of time watching sunsets, and there is something that is so magical and seemingly spiritual about that experience that people gather to watch it happen. They clap when it's over. There's there's like this coming together around it that feels very much like there's something bigger than just me right now, that feels very spiritual. And
I agree with that 100%. And I think that through science, we can actually begin to understand and define some of this stuff. But in my opinion, and I think a lot of people who practice spirituality of some type or practice faith of some type, I think that they worry sometimes that if something is defined, if something is explained through scientific means, that it makes it less miraculous and now it can't be spiritual for them anymore. And I don't think that's the case at all. In fact, for me in particular, because I am also kind of an analytical individual, understanding something actually makes it a little more spiritual for me, because now I can actually get a firmer grasp on what's going on. And that actually makes it a little more magical. So analytical thinkers, I think oftentimes the more they understand, the more spiritual it becomes, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what surprised you most over the course of your research and this movie, which took quite a long time?
Yeah, I interviewed people for, I'd say probably about 2 years before we started the edit. Well, we actually started the edit and then went back and captured some B-roll and some other stuff. And we interviewed all kinds of people. Not everybody made it to the film because we had to make it within a certain amount of time. We were restricted by time. So had I known in advance, I probably could have made a whole series out of all of the data that I was, film I was able to gather. But, we ended up with about a 90-minute film, which was great. But I'd say the biggest thing that I learned, I kind of alluded to earlier, which is just how much similarity there are between all of these different people with all these different beliefs. And I didn't expect that. I really expected that, somebody who is Christian would have extraordinarily different beliefs than somebody that's spiritual based. But when you boil down the definitions and when you boil down the root beliefs, there's so many similarities between everybody. And I was really surprised at that, because in my upbringing, as most, organized religious upbringings, you're taught your faith is right, everybody else's faith is wrong. That's a common practice. It's unfortunate, but it's a common practice. And through talking to all of these different people, I found out that, again, there's so much more that's the same than is separate. And the way people live their lives and the things that they see, I mean, everybody I spoke to, had some kind of a spiritual thing that happened to them in their lives, whether they construed it as paranormal, whether they construed it as miraculous, whether they construed it as something that was neither and could yet to be explained by science. But everybody I spoke to had something happen to them in their lives that defied conventional explanation. And that I also think is something that everybody shared. And I was kind of surprised about that as well, because if you don't see spiritual things, or you don't talk about spiritual things, and that's another thing, we don't talk about a lot of this stuff, or we're discouraged to talk a lot about this stuff. There's still a stigma on spirituality. Some of it comes from the way that we're raised. Again, what I said before about our religion is right, or our way of believing is right and everybody else's is wrong. But it's just a general stigma on spirituality, where if you say that you saw a ghost, people chuckle. But if you wait a few minutes, those people that chuckle at you about seeing a ghost also had something happen to them in their past that they can't explain. Everybody's had these experiences, and so few people openly and honestly talk about them for fear of ridicule. I think that's kind of sad. And that's a little bit of an unfortunate similarity that we all have too, is we all feel some sort of an embarrassment or a stigma associated with talking about spirituality, especially when it goes against mainstream belief systems.
Right. I think, and you're clearly here, I think, differentiating spirituality in a more new age sense versus spirituality in a religious sense, like a faith-based spirituality.
Yes.
Because I think in that arena, people are very comfortable talking about their faith. But when it comes to what are these more unexplainable, spiritually transformative, transcendent experiences that are not connected to faith, they seem to have a harder time making sense of how that fits in the picture of the narrative of their life, particularly if they don't have a strong faith that helps ground them. Or sometimes even if they do, I've had a lot of people on the show reach out and say, I was raised X, people who've reached out, not on the show, but behind the scenes. I was raised X and I was taught I can't believe this or I can't believe that. But again, like you're saying, I've had these experiences that lead me to be so curious about, where my loved ones go when they die, what happens when I die, can I connect with this higher soul consciousness, that kind of more spirituality, which would be considered like a more new age spirituality.
Yeah, and I think organized religion, seems like I'm beating up on organized religion. I'm not trying to here, but I think oftentimes a lot of organized religions really try to constrain people. They want to keep us kind of focused and pointed in a certain direction. And so when we come across things that we can't explain because they don't fit into that mainstream religious mold, the paradigm, you're just told to ignore it, deny it, or that it's evil. It's, the devil trying to play tricks on you, or something's going on that's not right. And it's certainly not of your religion. And so I think that again, it's a stigma. It's an embarrassment. You don't bring these things up because it goes against your faith. And I think that that's really unfortunate, because I think there's a lot out there to learn. I think, as a matter of fact, I think there are a lot of organized religions that their followers only get to see a small percentage of the teachings and the writings of the religion. And the Christian religion is a perfect example. Not to try to beat up on them. ultimate respect for the Christian religion. I think it has wonderful morals and teachings inside of it, but there are so many books of the Christian religion that are left out of canon that are extremely valuable, in my opinion, to that faith, and folks are not taught those. And I think that that's unfortunate that they're not, because I think they don't challenge the faith. I think they bolster and they strengthen the faith. And so I really wish that more people would study the non-canonical aspects of their own religion so they can get a full view of what it is. Mm-hmm. And I think they're robbed a little bit when they're not afforded that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I even think of in Judaism, Kabbalah, right, as sort of it's like a shunned I don't want to say shunned, but it's certainly not of the mainstream teachings.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I've talked to several people, friends of mine that are Christian, again, wonderful, wonderful people, and I talk to them, well, what about this book? What about that book? Have you researched the history of the area of the time, and looked into research? And a lot of them, some of them do, but a lot of them say, no, I don't do that because the Bible's the Bible and that's just the way that it is. I'm like, well, the Bible's the Bible. I'm not saying you can't believe in the New Testament. I'm saying that there are a lot of other teachings from your religion that I think might make you appreciate and love your God more. And why wouldn't you want to learn? And again, this is my analytical mind coming out. But if I'm passionate about something, I want to learn as much as I can about it. Mm-hmm. Hence, going on this personal journey in the first place. I was really passionate about finding out what happens to us after we die, and so I went on. So I wanted to learn as much as I could from all walks of life, and it didn't weaken my faith. It bolstered it, if anything. I mean, there's trials and tribulations. I'd be a liar if I said that I didn't go through ups and downs through this journey and question and doubt and have doubts about what I thought happens to us after we die. But in the long run, I think it made me, I'm better for it. I'm certainly better for it.
So what gave you, let me back up here. Where did you land after hearing everybody's experiences, what they shared? Where did you land in terms of answering your own question?
Sure. Depends on which day you ask me. Some days, I have a pretty definitive answer for that. Some days I don't. Mm-hmm.
It's so honest, because I feel the same way.
Yeah. It's difficult to say. I do want to say that I had a couple of experiences that happened to me during this journey that really gave me a much stronger sense that there is something that happens to us after we die. I did spend a period of my life where I was an atheist, where I didn't believe in anything. And I was on the path of trying to disprove spirituality, disprove religion, disprove creationism as a whole. And I felt that way for a long time. I don't feel that way anymore. I definitely feel like there's the possibility that there's something that we continue on after our lives end. And I'd say one of the biggest things that happened to me that really kind of changed me on that was I went through a past life regression hypnosis session. And being analytical, I didn't expect much from it, if I'm being quite honest. I thought it would be something fun to do, and I thought I might see some things, but I thought that I would really be able to explain it away, through being the analytical person that I am. But when I went through the past life hypnosis regression session, I saw things that defied explanation for me. It's things that I can't explain. Now, does that mean that they're non-scientific? No. Does it mean that they were truthful? Not necessarily. I have a vivid imagination. I can make things up. But I saw things during that hypnosis session that I can't explain. I videoed all of it too. I did that for reference. So there's a tiny bit of it that ends up in the film, but really it's fairly boring to watch. It's just me laying down with a blindfold over my face for 90 minutes. So it's not the most entertaining thing to watch. Right. But the thing that I found interesting about that was I was able to go back and watch it afterward. And just to see, because, when you hear about hypnosis, especially in reference to things like the paranormal, alien abduction, past life regression hypnosis, you always hear these stories about how the hypnotist will ask leading questions. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to make sure that didn't happen. Well, the gentleman that did the hypnosis session on me is one of the most professional people I've met in this realm. And he did an absolutely fantastic job. No leading questions at all. He guided me, but he did not plant any kind of thought in my head at all. So everything that I spoke about during that session, I have no idea where it came from. During that session, I lived one life. I died. I went into the afterlife, and then I was born into another life. And so I saw things that really shook me quite a bit, if I'm being honest. Things that I did not expect to see, that I had never heard, or at least that I remember that I've ever heard anybody explain in any kind of capacity before. And so I don't know where that stuff came from. Again, does that mean that I didn't make it up? Not necessarily, but it was so outside of my normal creative thought process that I don't know where I could have or how I could have made it up.
Yeah. And I think that that's what's so powerful, I think what's interesting here is that you got the answers by going within.
Yes.
And I think that so often we are looking for outside validation for our experiences to have been real. And I think that had I not had my own experiences early on, one, I would never be doing this podcast, because I would honestly think that what I was talking about was nonsense. There's no way. And then you have these lived experiences, and then you can't deny your reality. Again, if you're grounded in this 3D reality for most of your existence, that you have these transformative experiences that are unexplainable, that continue to happen. And then you don't need to seek the outside validation, although sometimes that does help. Just when I'm like, is this really real? Sometimes it is helpful to get someone outside to just say, to validate something, and whether it's a medium who said, or a psychic who says, expect this, and then that happens. But now, I think because of my own exploration and openness, I've cultivated the ability within me to trust and to know. And that's something that no one can ever take away from me. And it sounds like the same with you. Like, you can come out of the experience. And I think that this happens a lot when people go to medium. They'll have a reading. In the reading, they're like enthralled. They absolutely feel like they've connected with their loved one. And then they step out of the meeting or the session and they say, well, wait, maybe they could have known this, or maybe they could have known that. Right. And that's when I think our really rational minds take over and start to do what we do, which is to analyze, to think, to pull apart, to be our own scientists. But in the moment, you're there and you're feeling this and you're like, this is so real. And I think that the issue when you go to someone is that you doubt it after. When you have the experience yourself, at least speaking from my own experience, I'm like, there's no way that didn't happen.
Yeah. And it's so interesting you mentioned the inward journey too, because, here I went all over the Midwest and the United States, speaking to as many people as I could about what happens to us after we die. And while I gained wonderful, terrific insight from everybody, all of that insight pointed me toward the inward journey. And I think that's really where I found most of my answers. So if I wouldn't have spoken to all of these folks, I wouldn't have known to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's really was probably of the greatest benefit to me. And it's really had an extraordinary change on my life. Because it's made it easier for me to be able to accept things that I don't understand, which is really difficult for an analytical person to do. I always want to understand what's going on, but I've learned to be able to accept things that I can't understand, and it doesn't make them any less valid. It doesn't make them any less true just because I don't understand them. You don't have to be able to explain something to believe in something. I don't know how the sun operates, but I believe it because it comes up every day. So now it can be explained.
Right. I don't know how gravity works.
I don't know how to explain
but I know.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know how to explain gravity, but I know that my feet are planted on the ground every day, and I step out of bed and I walk to the bathroom and brush my teeth.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that at some point in the future, there may be a time when human beings are able to explain what happens to us after we die. I think they may be able to validate that there is an afterlife through scientific means or otherwise. And I look forward to it if something like that could ever happen. Hopefully I'm still alive when it does, so I know. But I think that there may be a point in time in the future where we may understand what happens to us after we die. And it may validate everything that we're all thinking right now. And that's a common practice in humanity, for us to make assumptions about things that we don't understand. And sometimes they're wrong and sometimes they're right. It's human nature to seek out.
Yeah. And I guess when you say that, my first thought goes directly to like Ian Stevenson and the group at University of North Carolina, I think is where they are doing the research on these, children who have come back and reported past lives very clearly. And to me, I'm like, okay, well, what would be another explanation for that? They're like, I was a pilot and I died and this is how I died and this is where I died. And then that gets validated. And it's like, oh, but no, that's not sufficient. It's like, how is that not? How is that not some sort of evidence that there is something beyond, that our consciousness exists in some form or fashion?
Yeah. And to be honest with you, why be afraid if that's the truth? If that's the truth, that's something that it could be a joyous thing, knowing that you are able to come back again and again and experience life again and again. I mean, the only frightening part about that to me, and I speak about this in the film a little bit when I talk about my past life regression hypnosis session, the only part of it that concerned me or still gave me a little bit of fear was most of the time, if you come back into another life, you don't remember your previous lives.
Right.
So it's almost akin to atheism, where you don't exist anymore because you don't exist as you were, at least until you die again. So there's a little bit of fear instilled in that. But again, the big question to me is if we could prove that reincarnation exists, I don't think there's anything to be frightened of. I don't understand why people are frightened of that being a possibility. I guess it's because it shakes their faith that they're raised in, or it calls into question the differences between spirituality and science. But again, I think that there's an opportunity where science may be able to explain this at some point in the future. And again, like I said earlier, that doesn't mean the magic goes away. It's still a miraculous thing, and it still could be by creation. By some form of a creator. Just because we've explained it doesn't mean that it can't be by intelligent design. But I just don't think there's anything to be frightened of when it comes to having conversations about these possibilities. I think that there's joy in it.
Well, and I think it shakes people when there's uncertainty.
That's true. That's
and people
true.
like certainty.
Yeah. But the ultimate uncertainty is death. And I think us trying to explain death is where we get all these, all the myriad of the different religions. And again, I think there's a lot of similarities between all of the different religions. So I think there's some sociology and geography that comes into play with that. There's habits. There's the human element. Even if there was a core of the same creation story, I think we as human beings will find a way to twist it for our own gain and our own purposes. And that, there's numerous examples of that throughout history where people have taken beliefs and twisted them to make them fit what they want to do as far as, governmental rule, whatever the case is. I mean, I could speak about all that stuff too, but
that's for a different, maybe a different podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Ben, if people are interested in your movie, where can they learn about what you've done? Where can they find the movie? Where can they watch it? Because it's a spectacular, it's just a great display of different people, different perspectives, and their experiences.
Yeah. So if anybody's interested in watching the film, you can watch it on Amazon Prime. You can also watch it on Tubi. Those are the two easiest ways to find it. There are several other streaming sites where you can watch it, but those are probably the two easiest. Most people have Amazon Prime these days. And if not, Tubi is a free service. It has commercials, but it's a free service. So those are probably the two best bets.
So Afterlife, a captivating exploration of life's ultimate mystery. I was so honored to be interviewed for that. So thank you so much. So this is a little bit of a shameless self-promotion here as well, but also just a great documentary that really captivates a lot of what I talk about on the podcast. So thank you for bringing it to life in a new dimension, Ben. And thank you for including me in that.
Well, thank you for being part of it, Amy. I think that the insight that you brought to the film was absolutely fantastic. You have such grace and levity when you talk about these things. It was really a breath of fresh air to have you share your insight and your experiences on the film. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.